My name is Kedar. I'm 58 years old. I'm married with 3 children, and I live in Jerusalem. I'll tell you a little bit where I live. I live in South Jerusalem.
Right.
So if I look from my apartment left, I can see the hills of Bethlehem.
Wow.
You know who was born in Bethlehem.
I know.
You know,
Jesus
all
Christ.
your listeners know also.
Right.
And if I look to the north, then I can just about see the walls of the old city of Jerusalem and Temple Mount behind, and the churches and the synagogues and the mosques in the old city. So I'm very privileged to be living in such a place in Jerusalem. I am a career diplomat, and previously I've served in New Delhi, in Dublin, Ireland, in Washington, Chicago, and in Chicago. And my previous position, I was ambassador from Israel to Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia. And in my latest job, it is now ambassador from Israel to South Sudan. And as you said, this is my second visit. I presented my credentials to your president in February, and this is my second visit since then, and I intend to be coming here as many times as possible.
Right. Thank you for that background. Now let's talk about your docket, Ambassador, the relations between the two countries, Israel and South Sudan. How would you describe it?
Well, I think they are excellent relations. You know, they have historic roots. I don't know how many of your listeners know, but I'm sure quite a few do know about the assistance that Israel gave to the South Sudanese during your liberation struggle. If it was military help, security help, medical help, and humanitarian, in many other ways. And after you received, granted, received your, you gained your independence.
Right.
Israel recognized South Sudan exactly one day after. And very quickly we established diplomatic relations. And we want to continue the good and intimate relations that we had with your people before independence, now after independence, and to be with you as friends and allies, and to help South Sudan to build a prosperous country and a healthy society. So we are trying to do this in all ways that we can.
Right. Right, a very good morning to you once again, and welcome back from the commercial break, coming to 22 minutes after the hour of 7. You're still listening to the live broadcast of the Dawn program here on iRadio with me, Emmanuel Joseph Akila. Our guest in the studio today is the Ambassador of Israel to South Sudan, Gershon Kedar. Ambassador, let's talk about some of the projects or activities of Israel in South Sudan. Probably let's begin with the health sector. Are you involved?
Yes, what we are working on at the moment, and we discussed it with the President and your ministers in my first visit in February. We are involved in a project, I think a very important project, at the Juba Teaching Hospital, where we are committed to refit and reconstruct the emergency ward at the hospital. As we speak, containers of equipment have already been sent from Israel with everything necessary to revamp the ward, with construction materials, with medical equipment, top state of the art. Much of it Israeli equipment, and very soon after these containers will arrive in Juba. We will start the work. Hopefully by the end of August or beginning of September, all the work will be done. We will open the ward together with the Minister of Health and the head of the teaching hospital, and then we will start a series of training sessions for the doctors, nurses, and administrators. We would like to share our experience and best practices in emergency medicine, so that your staff will be able to run the emergency ward in the most efficient way, and to save lives. The rabbis, Jewish religious leaders, they have a phrase which says that he who saves a life, one life, saves a whole world. So it's just important for us that many lives will be saved, which really be many worlds, because every life is a family, it's a village,
Right.
it's a whole world.
Right. And on the issue of the training, do we know how many people are you targeting, and when are you going to start the training, for instance?
Of the medical training.
The medical training, right.
Well, we will be doing it for the doctors and nurses and administrators of the hospital, those people who will be working there. So it's up to the hospital to decide who they want to be trained, but we will train as many people that the hospital thinks are necessary in order to run the ward in the most efficient way.
And how are you expecting the outcome of this support from Israel to South Sudan? Do you think this, in one way or another, will help improve the health sector in this country?
Well, I think there's many things that can be done. There are, lots of medical needs, and we are trying to do what we can do and what we can do best. Of course, after we finish that, there will be many more things that need to be done, and we will be open to suggestions and requests from the medical experts in South Sudan. We will take one thing at a time. There is also another thing which is done on the medical side. There is an Israeli non-government organization called Save a Child's Heart, and we are working together with the medical people in South Sudan to bring to Israel. What they do is they do heart operations for children that cannot be done here, and they're working in many countries around the world. So we are working on bringing to Israel. At the moment, we are talking about 5 children who need heart operations that cannot be done here. And the plan is to bring them to Israel for the heart operations. And if this goes well, we can discuss with them perhaps doing training for cardiologists in Israel, so that the skills and the capabilities will be increased here, so more children who need heart operations, complicated operations, will be able to undergo the operations here in South Sudan.
And when is that going to be implemented or realized?
Well, I can't say exactly, because it's a whole medical procedure. The children have to have medical tests to see what their situation is. So it's work in progress, but the NGO Save a Child's Heart is committed and has budgeted for, at the moment, 5 children to come to Israel for these operations.
Right. Thank you for that, Ambassador. And probably we can also talk a little bit about some of the activities of Israel in terms of agriculture. I understand Israel is one of the countries advanced when it comes to agriculture, especially to the mechanized farming in the world. So how are you engaged in the agriculture sector in South Sudan?
Well, so first of all, about Israeli agriculture, when people come to Israel and we tell them, you are now in the Negev desert, and they say, what do you mean a desert? It's all green. And then we have to explain that a desert is not a matter of green or brown.
Right.
Desert is an issue of the amount of rainfall. But if you only rely on the rainfall and what God gives just by itself, it's not enough. God tells us that we have to help ourselves.
Right.
So Israeli agriculture is based on bringing water from other areas, from the north to the south, to make the desert bloom. It's still a desert, but it blooms. So in all countries that we have diplomatic relations with, and also countries that we don't, we like to share our expertise. We don't think expertise is something that we should keep for ourselves. We like to share it. So in the same way, we like to share with South Sudan. I am now working together with the various ministries here in South Sudan to bring South Sudan back to a program where agriculture students will come to Israel for a year during their studies, perhaps after the 3rd year of the 4 years of studies, and will work and earn money for their work, but 1 day a week will also receive training and study program 1 day a week, and then they will, after their studies in South Sudan, hopefully they will integrate themselves into the agricultural sector and agribusiness sector in South Sudan to help with the development there. Of course, there's also an Israeli company, many people have seen it, Green Horizon, which is working together with the government on bringing Israeli agricultural technologies and know-how. There is a farm near Juba, and they are growing vegetables, corn, and other things. I visited last February.
Right.
In fact, I even I even drove one of their tractors. But don't worry, I have a
So you know how to
I have a
drive.
tractor license. Don't worry, I was not doing anything illegal.
All right. So, Ambassador, the scholarship, the studies you're talking about agriculture, is it a kind of scholarship to some South Sudanese?
Well, it's a type of
It's a training.
scholarship, but it's a train. Some people call it a work and earn program. So we bring from all over the world, from developing countries, 3,000 to 4,000 students every year, and we want South Sudan to be back in this program, and we are working on the details together with the relevant ministries, and then we will work together with the university, our faculty of agriculture, to pick the most appropriate students. Of course, those that want to come. It's completely voluntary, obviously, but I'm sure a lot of agriculture students would like to take the opportunity.
Right. And let me ask about the energy. Is there any plan of having to set up, for instance, solar energy or any kind of helping South Sudan in that regard?
So there's a lot of sun in South Sudan, and there's a lot of sun in Israel.
Right.
So we have quite a few companies private companies in Israel that are active in the solar field in Israel and also abroad.
Right.
And there is now an Israeli company which has already signed agreements with the government and received all the licenses and has undergone all the various checks and that tests that have to be done, whether it is the economic or environmental effects of solar energy plants. And I hope very soon, I cannot speak for the company, but from what I understand from them, I hope
Sure.
very soon that they will establish a solar plant here, which will increase the capability of the electric company, and more citizens of South Sudan will be able to enjoy electricity from the grid rather than using like diesel generating, which is costly and bad for the environment.
Right. And Ambassador, since the next day after the independence of South Sudan, Israel recognized South Sudan as an independent state. Probably we cannot ignore the current political situation in this country, and we want to understand, the people of South Sudan want to understand the role or the position of Israel on the current political situation in the country with the implementation of the revitalized peace agreement. So what do you say?
So, diplomats do not get involved in the internal politics of a state that the receiving state, what is called.
Right.
But we do encourage both sides to go ahead with the implementation of the agreement. I mean, at the end of the day, this is an agreement that both sides have signed upon. And both sides are committed. So we encourage both sides to implement their own commitments. So we do think it is important that the various pieces of legislation which have been agreed upon are brought to Parliament, or passed, whether it is regarding election process, constitutional changes, and what we are basically saying, we're not saying one side, do more, do less. It's not for us to, but we are saying, both sides, you agreed upon on certain things that need to be done. We encourage you to fulfill your commitments. And we think it's important. Israel is a democratic country, and we think it is important. We think democracy is the best way to go. And we support, we express the importance for human rights, political rights, economic and social rights, and we think that is the best way for all countries to promote their own social and economic development.
Right. And talk about human rights, Ambassador, and maybe let's talk about also the freedom of the press and democracy, as you mentioned. And South Sudan gained independence in 2011, unlike Israel. Israel has been there. Now, what lessons or what positive impact do you think Israel can have on South Sudan? And what can current leaders or South Sudanese learn from the experience of Israel to move forward?
Okay, so I would just say one thing, and anybody can learn from this and what they like. So before Israel was established, we had various military units, and each military unit was connected to various different political parties in pre-state Israel. And in 1948, after Israel was established, we were attacked by Arab countries. And every military unit was important. But there was one thing which was beyond that, was ensuring that there will be, in the end of the day, one unified military. So our first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, he made a decision to, even though it was during the war, he made a decision that all the various units which are politically connected have to be dismantled, and they all have to join the Israeli Defense Forces. This was units from the left and units from the right, and it was very hard for people. But the idea was one government, one army. And since then, we have had no issues of, militias or anything like that. It's everybody in Israel. There is compulsory military service, but we only have one Israeli Defense Forces. We don't have any units connected with one side or the other in the political spectrum. And this was done in 1948 and 1949, and I think this was a very good basis for Israel to advance politically, to develop politically, and to be a democracy, even though we have faced many attacks from outside, but we have fought for our independence, for our defense, and also promoted our democratic structures.
Right.
Yes, certainly Israel was very active in supporting South Sudanese in their liberation struggle, not just through military equipment, but also through military advisors, and not advisors who sat in the headquarters saying do this, do that, but military advisors who were in the field together with South Sudanese troops. This has been a great basis for South Sudan-Israel relations. In these days, as Israel is a member of the United Nations, and Israeli law states very clearly that United Nations sanctions are adopted automatically by Israeli law, Israel is not, like other countries, are not allowed to sell, to export military equipment to South Sudan. We hope that the reasons why there are such sanctions will not exist as soon as possible, and then we will be happy to do our part in helping a unified South Sudanese army. But we can only do that when there is full implementation of the peace agreement, which would naturally bring an end to the sanctions regime.
Right. And we go to Franco asking in Arabic, talking about the lack of training. There is need really for South Sudanese farmers to be trained, and asking for help from Israel. Why can't you take some farmers from all the 10 states and take them to Israel for some training? Let's talk about that.
Okay, thank you. So we try to do as much training as possible. Of course, due to COVID, there was a couple of years where it was not possible to do training in Israel, and we are revamping our training. We don't necessarily think the best way of training is to bring farmers. Our way is that what we do is train the trainer, and then we have a more exponential effect. So when we do courses in Israel, it's specifically for basically people involved in extension services. So if you have somebody from an extension services in one or two or three of the states who will learn Israeli technologies and experience and best practices and standards, when they come back to South Sudan, they will be able to use this and explain them and help many farmers, not just one who will come, but to help many farmers. We think that's the best way. And we think that the program of the agricultural students is important, because these are students who will have finished 4 years of studies, so they will have a good academic background, and then they will have 1 year of practical work and experience and studies. We hope as many of these students as possible, when they come back to South Sudan, will also be able to train farmers and help other farmers and to ramp up the agricultural sector here in South Sudan.
Right, and Gabriel was asking about human rights and the principles of human rights in the country.
Well, as I said before, that we encourage the government and all sides and all ministers and all sides to the agreement. We encourage them to implement the agreement, and human rights is part of the agreement. We are not a country that we will try to work directly with the leaders. We don't think it's necessarily a good idea to criticize every day one side or the other. It's also very difficult, as I'm based in Israel, to know exactly what is going on. But we encourage the sides politically too.
Right, and on human rights, Ambassador, 9 of our colleagues were briefly detained yesterday. So what do you think? I mean, how can... what is your, let's say, your advice to such acts? For instance, journalists went to the parliament to cover an event, and they were briefly detained by the security personnel.
Well, I can't comment on a specific event that I don't know about, but we say very openly to our interlocutors in the government that basic freedoms are important for every country. And there can be no real social and economic development unless people know that they have basic freedoms, and one of basic freedoms is, of course, freedom of the press.
Right.
So we do say this directly to leaders in the country, and we show Israel as an example of a country where we have suffered terrorist attacks, where we have been in wars, we are still in a situation. Just last May, 4,000 rockets hit Israel by Hamas from Gaza, but we always do as much as we can that despite military activity, human rights and freedoms are maintained, and we think that's the best way to go on.
All right, and let's go to the last caller. Alison was asking about the support in terms of education. He's a teacher, he's visually impaired, and he's asking for your support, Israel.
Right, thank you. Yes, as he said, Rome was not built in a day. So this is only my second visit. So we are trying to work in many areas. The education area is one area that we have not yet started, but I will take the suggestion back home, and I promise to see what we can do. I think maybe we'll be able to work together with international organizations working here, where it is UNESCO or other organizations, but I very much welcome the suggestion. And I will, as I said, I will take it back home and we'll see what we can do. Right. There is no shortage of work to be done here.
Right. And Ambassador, we have a text message here from Christine Daniel in that is in Western Bahr al-Ghazali State. She's saying actually, thank you, Ambassador, for coming to iRadio Studios. I want to ask this simple question. How can I travel and study in Israel? That's the simple question from her. You can respond.
Well, I can't respond specifically to her request because I don't know what she wants to study. But in principle, anybody who wants to study in Israel, I presume there is obviously the issue of scholarships. Nearly all the universities in Israel do have scholarships available. Of course, it is competitive. There are students from South Sudan in Israel now who have received scholarships. It's not something that as a government we are involved in in universities, but any student is welcome to go to the websites of the various Israeli universities. We don't have that many. We are a small country, 6 or 7 universities, to look up scholarships. And I am committed that if a student receives a scholarship, I will personally ensure that all the visa issues will be sorted out. But it's first up to the student to competitively apply for a scholarship, and many of the scholarships are for postgraduate, where students will be involved in research, and they have to connect with an Israeli researcher to receive the scholarship. And I wish Christine all success, and hopefully that she will find her place in Israeli university. And as I said, if that happens, then I will help with ensure that there will be a visa.
Right, and it's now 10 minutes to the top of the hour. We're about to wind up our discussion this morning, but let's also talk about the position of Russia, Israel in this, what is happening actually around the world regarding the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And I understand there was a UN resolution, and Israel was part of that. But we want to make it more clear maybe to the listeners of iRadio. Tell us more about what is happening in Ukraine and the position of your government.
So there have been various UN resolutions in different UN bodies, and Israel has voted in favor of these resolutions, which are basically condemning invasion of Ukraine. We have been quite active to try to bring a peaceful end to the conflict. In fact, our Prime Minister flew to Moscow early on in the conflict with blessings of United States and European countries and of the Ukraine to see what he can do to bring the sides together to make a negotiated peaceful solution. It was not successful, as we know that the war is still continuing, but we are still available if the sides are interested. And besides that, we have been quite active in providing humanitarian help. In fact, just after I got back from South Sudan, I was sent by my ministry to the border between Slovakia and Ukraine. And we sent through that border generators, very big generators for hospitals in Ukraine, which were cut off on the power supply. And people were dying in hospitals because of no electricity. And this was a specific request from the Ukrainian government, and we brought actually generators from Italy all the way to the Ukraine. And I was proud that I was there at the border crossing when we ensured that everything crossed into Ukraine properly. And also we've been the only government that has set up a field hospital in Ukraine. Many governments, of course, give more humanitarian help because we are a small country. We are, the United States and European Union are much bigger, but we have done quite a lot given our small size, specifically in the health area. Again, when we set up a field hospital, it was not in a war zone specifically, but it was in a country at war, and many Israeli doctors and nurses, endangered their life to go there to save lives. And hundreds of operations and treatments took place there, both of civilians and of military people who'd been injured. So we have been helping, and we are continuing to help, mainly on the humanitarian side.
Right. And your last message to the people of South Sudan through Israeli Ambassador as we wind up.
Well, first of all, I wish everybody a good morning. Sabah al khair. A good day. I hope that the relations between Israel and South Sudan will continue to develop. I wish all South Sudanese all the best. I wish the political leaders to have the wisdom, the understanding, and to step up to the challenge, the various challenges in implementing the peace agreement. And I look forward to a prosperous and developed South Sudan. And I promise that Israel will do all we can to help.
Right. Thank you very much, the Ambassador of Israel to South Sudan, Gershom Kedar, for joining us on The Dawn today.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Thank you very much, all the listeners of iRadio.
Right, it's our pleasure. And with that, we have come to the end of the Dawn edition today. Do join us again tomorrow morning at the same time to get the latest on what's happening in South Sudan and beyond the borders.